Welcome to this GitLab demo walkthrough video. Today we're going to look at using Rancher 2.0 to create an AWS EKS cluster, then adding this cluster to a GitLab project. Let's take a look at an overview of what we'll cover in the next 20 minutes. Before we begin, let's walk through the tasks that we're going to go through this demo. First, we'll install Rancher 2.0 into AWS, and then we'll create an AWS EKS cluster using the Rancher we just created in AWS. Then we'll add a newly created AWS EKS cluster using Rancher. We'll then add that as an existing cluster to a GitLab project. Once we have that set up, we'll run a pipeline using Auto DevOps in the Rancher AWS EKS cluster we just created. After that, we'll tear down the GitLab project, we'll tear down the AWS EKS cluster we created at Rancher, and then we'll also tear down Rancher using Terraform. So let's begin. See the document, the link will be below as I mentioned. We'll walk through some prerequisites. We'll start our first task. Let's go ahead and begin that and look at the installing Rancher 2.0 using Terraform into AWS. Go ahead and go over there. So there's a nice document here that we will follow along with Rancher, and it walks through how to actually go into and install Rancher in AWS. They also have Vagrant and a DigitalOcean example. So we're going to do the Amazon one, AWS. Let's go ahead and do that. And here it is. And here are the prerequisites. Again, you can also see the links here. You will have to put Terraform on your machine, laptop, whatever. You also need to have AWS account. All right. First thing we're going to do here, we're going to download their quick start, then drive to the AWS directory. And once we get there, we're going to go and edit this terraform.tf-vars file to put in our AWS access key and our AWS secret key. I will not show you that, but we will look at the rest of that file. There's a region. I'm going to use US West 2. Prefix is important because as we look later, we look through AWS. It's a quick way of doing that. And then all of this is pretty much boilerplate. You just stay with that. So from here, we're going to do this live, and we'll do the Terraform init. Let's go ahead and copy that. Now this will verify our Terraform.tf-vars file. Everything looks good, and it looks like we're ready to go. So then we just do a Terraform reply, which is really nice. And we'll then fire up and we'll look at our AWS console as this starts applying and building out the Rancher agent and the Rancher server AWS instance. Let's just say yes here. And now you see we have this thing actually Terraform firing up our two instances. So let's go over to AWS now, and we'll just refresh this. And we'll see we now have the Rancher server coming up. More real estate. It says it's running, but in reality it's still initializing. So we're looking for a status check where these two are green. Once they're green, we'll be able to go in and bring up and look at that Rancher instance. If we come down here, we'll see that its Rancher is already completed. With the Terraform apply, we now have our URL. Copy that. And again, it's really not, excuse me, really can't use that URL until we have an actual status of green here. We're still waiting. We do have the agent now up and running, but still being initialized. So let's just do a little pause here and we will come right back. So you can see here, we're done. It takes a few minutes, but our status check is all green for the server. We can now go back to our script here that we ran. We'll see we'll have the HTTPS URL. Just copy that as I did here, paste it in, and you're ready to go. It's admin. And we have now completed task 1. We are now ready to move on to task 2. Remember from our last step, we had the URL. This will be different for you. So we can go over here and connect to Rancher, use an admin for the credentials. We'll now just go in here and create a cluster. We're in global clusters, and we'll just add a cluster here. You notice you could do GCP, Azure, it's really nice, or DigitalOcean. You may want to use, here we'll just need to give it a cluster name. I'll use my initials, AWS-cluster, how's that? And you can use whatever name you'd like. I recommend using the prefix you're using. Your keys, I would go back to your Terraform.tfvars file, and you'll have those both right there. Just copy and paste those. And we're ready to go. We're just going to take the defaults here, and now I'm going to change this to a medium. I don't need a large, so we'll do 1 to 3. We're going to tear this right down after we're done, so there's not going to be too much expenses as far as AWS. And at this point, we are provisioning and we're setting up our EKS cluster. So let's go over and look at AWS here. Go to services, and we'll look at our EKS, and we'll look at our cluster, and it's just not ready there yet. I had to pause it. It takes a little while to get the cluster going with AWS. Also take a little while to provision it. But you can see here now we have this, it's creating, because this is cluster name, and it's now creating our AWS EKS cluster. It's also at the same time going out and spinning up 3 EC2, right? Because we selected 1 to 3. So if we go over to services here and we look at EC2 and MCE, we'll finally see a couple similar to this cluster node here for the new one that we just started. So let's now move on to task 3, existing clusters to GitLab project. We created Rancher, right, on AWS. I've got it here on the right. And we're going to be using Rancher to capture information that we're going to then put in the GitLab project so we can add an existing Kubernetes cluster to it. So let's go ahead and fill in some of this. We'll call this MCE. I'll give it the same cluster name that I had before. And I get that from Rancher. Let's just copy this guy here. Just to be consistent, you can have whatever name you want here. And from this point forward, we're going to pick up the API URL, walk you through that. We'll pick up the how to get the CA certificate. We'll get that. And then we'll talk about how to get the token. And once we have that, we can then add the cluster. So let's walk through that. We enter the cluster name, API URL. We can just go right here to global cluster, and we select our cluster here, and there's a little elliptic here that we can point to, and it says view an API, and you'll see a thing called API endpoint. If you'll grab that, or copy that I should say, let's get rid of the double quotes. We'll put that into our project right here. And you want to get rid of these guys. And we now have our API endpoint, API URL. Next, we need a little more difficult to get the cert and the token. It's not overcomplicated, but you need to follow these steps here. To do this, we're going to actually go into our cluster. So we're going to click into Rancher, and there's a kubectl that we can launch right from within Rancher. So we're going to take these commands right from this document here and copy and paste them into this AWS EKS cluster. And you'll see it says, hey, the service account. So we have a service account GitLab we're going to use later to get our secrets and stuff. We need then to create this cluster role binding. Let's do that. Just do a copy and paste. Now you can see we created the GitLab cluster admin, and now we can go get our token and cert. First thing we need to do is get our secrets so we know what we're looking for that we're going to apply into these cert and token kubectl commands. And this is what we're looking for. This guy right here, GitLab token, and then this 5-digit name. So we'll copy that, and we're going to go and replace that right here, each one of these. So instead of screwing up my code here, let me copy this, and I'll just go back a little bit, and we'll replace the P8 NM9 with my X's here. Oop, I think it's NM, my bad. All right, now we'll go ahead and do that. And now we have our token. So we want to go ahead and copy from this EY all the way to AQ, and I like to remember those to make sure I copy the whole string. And let's put that into our token. And we can see the AQ, and I just do EY, and we're good to go. So let's get our cert now. To do that, we're going to pretty much do the same thing. Just copy this code, and then we're going to replace that GitLab manage piece. Oops, forgot to edit that. All right, let's go back, and let's put in the GitLab token P8 NM9 in here. P8 NM9. Oops, typo there. And we should be able to then pick up our CA cert here. So we have that. Let's copy that. And let's put that over here. We got the big N and the N. So at this point, we have everything we need to add the existing AWS EKS cluster, Kubernetes cluster, into our GitLab project. And let's do that. And we'll add the Kubernetes cluster. Now we're looking at task 4. We're now going to install once we add the existing the AWS EKS cluster, Kubernetes cluster, into the project, we need now to install the applications. So what we're going to do is install Helm Tiller, and then from there we're going to install the Ingress so we can actually get to our review app we're going to spin up, Prometheus for monitoring, and GitLab Runner. But before we do that, we have to make sure that the cluster is added and it's ready to go. See is this Helm Tiller will change from a gray to where you can actually hit the button. So let's go install that. So you install Helm Tiller first, as it says here, before we install these other applications. So I'm just going to hit this button here, install. So now we're installing Helm Tiller, which will allow us to do these other 3 applications that we need to install. And this just takes a brief moment. I'll pause and we'll come right back. You can see we now have Helm Tiller. It says from install to installed. Now we can go ahead and install the Ingress. We can do these, in parallel. We can install Prometheus, and we can install Git Runner. So once these have the same, button installed, then we have completed task 4. We're ready to move on to task 5. All right, we're going to do task 5. We're going to install the Ingress. Now this one you're going to have to hang with me on. Due to the AWS, this elastic load balancer, it has this DNS. And this will change, right? So we do not get an IP address from AWS for this. So we have to go out, create a domain, our domain name. In my case, I have this mce-gitlab.com, my own domain name that I have set up. And we're going to add this CNAME record so we can then point to that ELB within GitLab. And I'll walk you through that. So first things first, we need to go into Rancher, into that Kubel that we are at, right? Launch kubectl. And we're going to do this one command right here. That will then give us, for this AWS EKS cluster that we have, this is now our Elastic Load Balancer DNS name in AWS. All right. We need to then go to, in my case, my own domain name here, and I'm going to change this EKS record, and I'm going to replace what I have here with this one I just copied from that kubectl command, and you'll notice I have a star.eks. You can really do whatever you want. I'll show you where we're going to use that. Let's save that. So that will now point to this ELB, even though it changes, will be good to go. We now have to go back to our GitLab project here. And you'll notice, let's refresh here. There's a base domain we're going to be working with. We can see things are running. And let's go in and get our base domain. If you look down at Ingress in your application, normally we would see an IP address here, but since we're dealing with AWS, right, we have this ELB, we're not going to get that. So what we're going to do is go up here to the base domain, and we're going to put in our EKS.myDomain. Oops. Now, this will now take that Ingress and make sure that we point to that Amazon ELB for our project, and we'll be able to look at our, as we'll see here shortly, our review app, and it'll allow us to give us that link to get to it. So let's go ahead and save this, save the changes, and we now completed task 5. Okay, we're ready for task 6, which is setting up Auto DevOps. If you'll notice on the project here that we have Kubernetes all configured. Now we're going to enable Auto DevOps. I can click right here, or I could go to Settings, into CI/CD, and set the property there. In this case, we'll just go to Enable Auto DevOps. Since we've set up the base domain, we're good. We'll just go here and click the little box, Auto DevOps. Now we'll have an actual pipeline, as you'll see here shortly. And we'll stop at the deployment. We won't go to production. We'll make it manual, but let's save those changes. All right, let's just verify we're good to go. We have Auto DevOps enabled, and we have Kubernetes configured. At this point, I'm going to go ahead, and we now have our project here. And if we look at our pipeline, since we went in, and let's see what's happening. We haven't made any changes to it yet, but there it is. It's running. So we added Auto DevOps. We now have the pipeline running, and it's going to be using, we're using the AWS EKS Kubernetes cluster to do this, and we're ready to go. What we'll do next, the next task, will actually, that we just did is 7 right now. We're going to tear it down and show you how to tear this all down. Get rid of everything from the AWS EKS cluster, the Rancher instance in AWS, as well as we'll tear down the GitLab project, and we're done. All right, next step coming up, last task. All right, we're ready for our last task, number 8. We're going to remove our GitLab project. We'll actually tear down AWS EKS Cluster using Rancher 2.0 UI, and then we'll tear down Rancher itself in the AWS EC2 instance, as well as the agent. So we'll actually start with a blank canvas, and we'll complete with a blank canvas. So let's go ahead and let's do that. So first, let's go to our GitLab project, and this will be an easy one. Just go to Settings and General, and we'll go ahead and we'll just remove our project, which will remove the link with the integration with EKS. So that project is gone now. Let's use Rancher 2.0. We'll take our cluster here. We'll go ahead and delete that. Waiting for the controller. Now it's in the process. It's gone. So let's go to AWS EKS. And here's our cluster. And we'll see it's being deleted. And that takes a good, I've seen 10 plus minutes to do that. So I will pause and we'll come back after that is deleted. So we can see no longer do we have the cluster sitting in Rancher. We go over here to AWS now. Cluster is gone. Now we just have our last task here. We removed the project. GitLab project is gone. We tore down AWS using Rancher UI, EKS Cluster. Now we're going to tear down Rancher itself. Those are the Rancher agent and the Rancher server sitting on AWS. What's really nice, so we can use this Terraform destroy command down here. Command -- force. Let's do that. And before we do that, though, let's go to our Amazon so we can see those instances. Go to EC2. And we can now see we have the Rancher server and Rancher agent there. And let's go ahead and do our Terraform force destroy. And we'll start that process. This will take a few minutes, but let's go ahead and refresh here. And we can see start working. And there we go. The Rancher agent is now shutting down. And we'll wait a little bit more. I will pause this and we'll come back after these have been deleted. So you can see the Rancher agent has been terminated. We're now terminating the server. As you can see over here, we lost the agent, but now very shortly we'll lose the actual server here. That is it being teared down, and we've lost our server. So let's do a quick recap. We installed Rancher 2.0 using Terraform into AWS. We have two instances, a Rancher agent and a Rancher server. Once we had that, we created an AWS EKS cluster using the Rancher UI. Pretty simple to do that. We took some key variables using cube control out of the Rancher UI to go in and add the AWS EKS cluster we created with Rancher into the GitLab project. And then once we did that, we ran a pipeline using the Rancher AWS EKS cluster we added to the existing GitLab project. And finally, we tore everything down. We started with the GitLab project. We then removed the AWS EKS cluster using the Rancher UI, simple one click there. And then we actually tore down Rancher using the Terraform destroy. Great, appreciate you hanging in there, and enjoy Rancher and GitLab.